Good morning, family. This is your Sensei Al Bob, and it's Saturday, October whatever. It's about 11ish, maybe pushing towards 12. And so we are interesting times, and that's one of Buddha's interesting curses. May you live in interesting times. So I'm starting like the Japanese from the back of the book forward. And here are some photos of people I've loved and cared for. And I was always caring for people for who they were, not because of their, you know, transactional situation. Pretty much in our society, everything is transactional, meaning what you can make money. I used to work for desperate lawyers, and it was all about money. It wasn't about justice. There is no justice. It's what you can make money at. You go to a law school, where do they try and put you into but corporate law? You know, and if it's, we're going against crime, they don't talk about the crime of the corporations. They call it white collar crime. The only white collar crime is the guy behind the teller's window who, sticks a few bucks in his pocket. The corporate crime, on the other hand, it's, did you know, according to John Hopkins Medical School, 5,000 people die a week from administrative incompetence in hospitals in the United States. 5,000 a week. Close to 200,000 people die from heavy metals that are given off by power plants. And God knows what the floods in North and South Carolina and mid-Appalachian states, especially down there near Wilmington, where all the hog farms were, that their septic kind of went into people's drinking water. People are drinking, pig feces and chicken feces, and they will for the next 20 years. And, when people start having little curly tails and their faces start looking like chickens, which they already do, you're going to be seeing some really interesting stuff. So, this affection that you can see here is human to human. It's not glandular. And now, it may turn into glandular, but it started out as respect and honor and an appreciation. Right? So there's my Magnum tie pin. Magnum, the photo collective. My photo teachers were Cartier-Bresson and Lisette Model, the people who started Vogue at the new school. And you didn't sign up, you had to be invited. And the classes, you had to bring 10 prints, and not to a classroom, but to their apartment on Fifth Avenue overlooking Washington Square. And you brought your favorite libation and your 10 prints, and you were critiqued. And that was, you were expected to be able to print. You were expected to know everything about taking a picture. That wasn't this class. This was a salon. And that is gone. That no longer exists. I have a friend who's a great photographer, a great teacher. She teaches at Roanoke College, and she teaches. She's their digital graphic person and their photo person, and their students. They have one of the best teachers. Meaning, her lectures on light and process are amazing. And I look at their kids' prints, and they are worthless. They're like Snapchats, faces. I mean, my little town, there's a farmer's market. That truly is a farmer's market. I mean, people grow this stuff. And there's a guy there who's a baker, and he is amazing. I just bought Boston cream pie that I can't eat, but it's so amazing. I had one bite. I'm giving it away to people. So anyway, I gave a slice to the librarian to get in her good graces. Anyway, and this is the face of friendship. This is the face of friendship. This is a theater group called the Living Theater, and there were productions done by Living Theater, and then there were many people who were through, and Robert De Niro was a person who went through the Living Theater. A number of really famous actors went through the Living Theater. And I also was part of HB Studios, Herbert Berghoff and Uta Hagen's theater school. I was part of that. And there was a time in my life where I could have been Robert De Niro, but I was doing other stuff. I was a painter. I was a community activist. I was a scientist. I was, a builder of nightclubs. And my life was more this than the transactional, than what my career, today. So I live in this Appalachian bubble of poverty between Boone, North Carolina, which is where App State is, which is a total hipster school. And then on my southern corner is Johnson City, Tennessee, which is where ETSU is, which is a gigantic engineering, and it's like Tennessee's version of Virginia Tech. And both those cities are white and extraordinarily rich. Now, Johnson City is way more diverse than Boone. Boone is like a city of, 120,000 or so. And there's like 3 black people there. And this morning I woke up and I'm living out in the middle of the forest. And, global, I don't like to call it, global warming or weather changing. No, these are way more drastic. Talk to the people in North Carolina. It wasn't some, warming or some weather change. No, it was a catastrophe. And that's what we're having, weather catastrophe. And we're on the edge of our environment to collapse. So one of the reasons I bought this piece of property about 20 years ago, it was out in the middle of the woods, and it was like an animal estuary, meaning, you wake up in the morning and you could hardly talk to anybody because the birds were singing so much. And this morning I woke up and there wasn't a single bird squawking. They're all gone. Because around us, the town's Boone has concrete factories and asphalt factories that pollute the air and water and come into our area. Now, our area looks unbelievably beautiful, but all the indigenous trees have died. And what we're suffering is moral abdication. And I went to this, as I was saying, to this farmer's market, and I go there because the people are so sweet, so nice. And so the lady who kind of was in third in command running it, I was saying, hey, can I was talking about something, and I read her palm, and she was like, oh, well, that's pretty amazing. And then her buddy next to her, I said, let me read your palm. And he was, oh, don't want to do that. That's devil worship. And then I started to explain to him that palmistry has nothing to do with any kind of spirituality or religion or devil worship. It's being able to be observant of the trends and body language of the individual. When I say, oh, let me read your palm, the way you put your hand up tells me something. The way you react to the things I say. And humans are like Mr. Potato Head. Now, I was a shrink for many years, but I was a shrink within the concept of social justice. I had a practice, but it was so. I worked for a well-known shrink, and he really loved the fact what I could do. But I was healing people too fast for him. 3 or 4 visits, they were out the door, and their problem was taken care of. He said, no, no, listen, these people have insurance. These people are rich. I want you to string them out for years so I can build a swimming pool, send my kids to college, own that Jaguar. And that's actual. That's about, I'm going to do something, you're going to give me money. And whether that thing is good for you or not, it doesn't matter. I'm making money. And that's where we are in our culture. And so, the guy went away and she kind of kidded, and we started talking, and I started telling her about the birds and the environment, and the fact that we don't live in a democracy. We never did. And she goes, Lise, it's not. I said, well, we killed over 100 million indigenous people just in North America, taking their land. She goes, well, we're not doing that now, and we are doing that now. Anyway, the more I showed her the truth, well, she got very upset with me. She said, I don't want to argue with you. I said, I'm not arguing. I'm just laying some stuff down. When I told her that within 10 months we were gonna not have money. Well, that never. I said, well, both China and India did it, and both those countries have billions of people. And she goes, well, they're not democracies. Well, India is the largest democracy in the world. In a lot of ways, it's more of a democracy than we are. So anyway, that is what's wrong, is that the average person is in moral abdication. One, they're in, Pollyanna, oh, Jesus will come and save me. Or, oh, there'll be some technology. My smartphone will figure it out. Or people are like in a level of despair where, oh, we can't do anything. No. Everyone can do something. And when you have friends like this, and when you are doing things like this, the way to change is through art, right? So back in the day, I was a technologist, electrical engineer, a child of Tesla. I thought we could, oh wow. Once I learned what was going on. So here is the military depot in Brooklyn, right next to Brooklyn Navy Yard. And every bomb, bullet, and tank that went to World War II in Europe went through this building. And this is why we won the war, this building. Because everything would come in on trains, they would put it into containers, and they would put it on Liberty ships, which they were knocking out 10 a day. And this is where the trains came in, and on the other side is where the boats were, and they just kind of lifted it over. This building had 7 million square feet, and it was, dumping over 100 million cubic yards of material into the European theater every day. And that's why we won the war. We just overproduced. Nobody was bombing our factories or railroads. And Germany was still outproducing us because they had 6 million, 12 million slave laborers, but they just ran out of soldiers who would fight. So, so this building, I had a lot to do because we started a thing called PS1. And the Brooklyn Development Corp said, we have this building here, and we've been wanting to put the garment district in it because they could move it all from 8th Avenue into here. The highways, the railroads, the boats were all right here. It would save traffic. It would make it great. And it's a beautiful building. But not only did they send every bomb, bullet, tank, everything to Europe, they sent all the bodies through here. Over 1.5 million bodies came through this building. And so you walked into that building, and it would just oppress you. The death, the violence, And if you were any kind of sensitive person, man, you got the feeling, you felt the rape, you felt everything. It was like totally amazing. So this is a good friend of mine. She and I had a video production company in New York. And she was a professional from England, and that was me. That was my corporate hat. We would do corporate videos. And when I lived in Ireland, this is a friend of mine, David, I forget David's last name, but he's an English guy. And I was in Ireland. This was the newspaper there, and he was getting arrested for being obnoxious when the police were trying to push us out of one of our abandoned buildings that we were putting homeless people in. And here's a car, Italian friend of mine had, that I put a natural gas bottle in, and we put burners from a stove I got out of the garbage, and he would drive around, and his car would be on fire. That was like performance art. He still does stuff like that. Here's Sandro Donini. So these are shows we did in an abandoned building. So that this building here, we put on collaborative artist projects, Art for the People, and a few other art nonprofits like that, put on this art show for 100,000 artists. And the Downtown Development Corp gave us that building for half a year to do it, gave us a chunk of change. The city would have buses running from Port Authority Bus Terminal, from Times Square, from City Hall, straight to this place. And we had all kinds of events. And before the Blues Brothers, there's me and David Boyle. And we were the original Blues Brothers. And I had this nightclub down on, what street was it? Mulberry? No. It was downtown in Tribeca, way below Chambers Street. And it was called the Raccoon Lounge because when I broke into that building, there was a family of raccoons living in it. I mean, come on. And it was a nightclub, and it was downtown, and this is before anything was open after 6, because, that was all Wall Street and business, and everybody left at 5:30. And we opened up at 7, had food, had music, had dance, had a bar, and nothing licensed. And the mob backed us. They loved us. So we finally sold it because we were paying rent. It wasn't like an abandoned building. But it was really a crapped out place. And we sold it to John Belushi and Dan Aykroyd. And they took it over. And they built their Blues Brothers act there. Let's see. So this is kind of my art. I was for Xerox, so I had unlimited. So these are all my photos, and here are texts of my technical treatises. And here's Judy Rifka, again, world famous painter, but we were buds. And this was one of the kids who I took off the street, who would have been dead, And here's good old Mr. Tropia, who started CBGBs and punk music. This guy's a pretty famous Italian artist. There's Judy giving a hug. Here's Dave and Pat. And here's Maggie May and Mr. Plexus himself. And these guys, we did if you go to Potato Wolf, we did a takeoff of Homer's The Iliad, and we did it after nuclear war. And these are people who were genetically changed from radiation. And this is Robin. Robin Williams, Robin Winters, Robin W. He's pretty famous. I used to do installation art with him, and we did a number of things at what's the name of that fancy art museum with the W that sponsored White Columns. Oh, it'll pop in my head. Here's my comedian sweetie, and we did a TV show. Here's one of the producers of Potato Wolf. He became one of the founders of MTV. Oh, and this guy, he was an amazing playwright, Montez. And this guy was a pretty famous sculptor. He came from Texas but was Jewish. His great grandfather was a musician and coined the phrase Texas Jew boy. And I think you can do that when you're Jewish. You can say things like that. Here's the show we used to do down on where the ocean, the amusement park on the ocean, and the big roller coaster. And I had a nightclub for guys who were mercs, and they were the strangest people. And again, it was one of my zombie nightclubs, way below the radar. And everyone had to wear costumes because nobody wanted to be recognized. And there was a whole group of mercs who basically loved to dress up like animals and have sex as animals. Here's the control room of Manhattan Cable during our Potato Wolf TV show. Here's the diner in Williamsburg, and now it's called Boho or Dumbo. Here is Det Paul. Here's another one of my boys who was, going to go kill someone, and I kind of picked him off the street and turned him into an electrician. Here is Donna Ann standing in front of a nuclear power plant. She had a whole series called They're Juggling Our Genes, and I could get her into these plants because I had worked in the nuclear industry, and I went around for a year going, hey, I'm a filmmaker, I want to tell you a story. And they would just, show me their worst side. I made one video with my mother as the person going through it, and she was like, the girl going through the rabbit hole. I can't. She knew nothing about nuclear power except, I would tell her stories. So she was like, my mom was smart. She knew what she was doing. And that video made the Nuclear Regulatory Commission look at Shoreham Power Plant a lot closer. And here's another one of our, this show was at No Say No. And there's John, what's his name? And here's out in one of the openings in front of my gallery called Sixth Sense on 6th Street. Here's a show in an abandoned building in Williamsburg. And here is Universal Peace Day. Suzanne and I and a bunch of other people who were artist activists started a thing called Universal Peace Day, and this was at the band shell. And because I worked in rock and roll, I knew a lot, and I worked in, I built a number of recording studios. I knew a lot of people, and here is Mr. Freedom himself, Richie Havens. And this was our first year, and we had hardly anybody there. But the second, third, fourth year, we got more. This is like our second year. We had about 1,200 people. And Richie would come back for every one. And every year there'd be more people. So it went from like a handful of people here to 1,200 people. And at the height, we had about 10,000 people. This was the whole band show. There's a name for this meadow. Sheep's Meadow, I think. And we had close to 20,000 people. And here's Beth B. and her hubby. And so this, every year we did this, I would get more and more outrageous in the kind of things I did. So I sculpted a dove out of styrofoam. And it was about the size of a Volkswagen van, a Combi. And I was doing a lot of art with Mylar, so I had a resource for Mylar, and I had these 30, 40 yard streamers of Mylar coming off the tail of the dove. And I had gotten some Army surplus weather balloons from my Merc friends and a couple of tanks of helium. And I had about six of these pretty big weather balloons. And I had the dove tied to a tree, and I was going to release the dove at the beginning of the event. And I didn't realize how strong helium is. And I had the dove tied to a small little tree. And in the crowd was showing up, and people were giving speeches, and the music hadn't started. And then this snapping sound occurs, and everyone looks, and the balloons had snapped the tree, and the peace dove flew over the crowd, this crowd right here, and like flew right over, and down Fifth Avenue with these 20, 30-yard streamers of mylar, and then up, and it didn't hit any building. It just went straight down Fifth Avenue and up, and it went over Kennedy Airport. And they had to, the mylar was showing up like gigantic aircraft on the radar, so they had to close Kennedy. So I had to stop being involved with this group. But that's what I always did. I did things that would just, and so these are monks. And my teacher, who came from this clan, wasn't, he had died by now, but this guy I'd known very well. And if you've ever seen the movie Doctor Strange, that was these guys. Their temple was up in the mountains between China and India. And they were those guys. They had those books. That's what I studied. And that's where I learned alchemy, from these guys. And this was a Japanese friend of mine who was a daughter of one of these monks who was Japanese. And and she was in her 70s, because she actually was in the monastery in Nagasaki, which was ground zero of the bomb. And even though it was ground zero, the monastery did not get destroyed, not even torched. Everything was incinerated except that place, and thousands of people went there and stayed there while other people died. So this was Universal Peace Day. So we had a real strong connection with, and we did this on the days that they dropped the bombs on Japan. And that's why we had such a strong Japanese Shinto priest guys. And they were my teachers, so I was, that's why I did it. That's why and that's when I came back from Los Alamos and San Diego and Kirkland Air Force Base, where I worked, where I could have been very nicely paid for the rest of that. Could have been a career. There were a number of times where I could have been a rich guy, but I had moral integrity. I was just there to learn what they were doing so I could bring that truth out. And so here is our little 6th Street Theater Company, and we would do, because David and I were into Celtic culture. I spent a lot of time with the old crone, and it took me years to get David to go to Ireland, but he finally did. And I took a whole crew. So there I'm being, the play was called The Wisdom of the King, and I was playing the king. And this was a theater, we had, George and I of Theater for the New City, built a tent, from my experience of doing carnival and circus in Australia, and we did that in New York. And we took it on the street, and because George was really well, and we were both well connected in the art world and city politics, the city basically let us do whatever we wanted to. And there I am in one of my more contemplative moods on one of our Friday potluck dinners. And Here is Michael. He and I were the two youngest guys to get master electrician licenses in New York. He was even younger than me. I was in my 30s. He was in the late 20s, and we were electricians. We were there. And there's Stephanie. Here's another person who, I mean, we were soulmates. And I could have, her daddy was a zillionaire, and he came all the way from Switzerland and said, "Listen, I'll give you $1 million to marry my wild child daughter. You seem to make her happy, and she's calmed way down since she's been hanging with you." But that kind of stuck in my craw. And these, I think you've seen these. I have to get a new book. 31 minutes. So, let's see. What have you guys been saying? Hello? Well, App State is a total hipster college, lacking of any spiritual anything. I used to lecture there in the 80s and about things like this. And it was a small teacher's school of about 800, 1,100, and now it's a school of about 18,000. Everyone's there to get a degree, go into hock, get a career, and they're really there just to drink at one of the 110 ale houses and, go skiing, because there's 3 skiing lodges within, less than 40 minutes from school. So it's just a party school. Now, whereas not Virginia Tech, ETSU, now that's quite a scholarly school, but again, it's just kids getting a diploma for a degree. I mean, not this. This is me there, right there, being an anthropologist. This is a tribe called the Walamajiri. This is all that's left. In 1972, they found uranium and iridium and titanium on their land, and there were about 1,100 of these guys. And the corporations and the government went out and just shot everyone in the head and left them in the outback to die. Not die, but just, turn into dust. Now, these people survived because they were out picking berries. And she was a little girl when that happened. And she was taken away and put in an Aboriginal school. And she was a nurse, and she couldn't fit in, she couldn't be assimilated. So she came back to take care of these guys who were all in their 90s. And when I was there, she had this baby. And none of these people, these 2 guys were the only 2 guys other than me, and they were in their 90s, and I was married, and the person who took this picture was my wife. And so that woman had that baby. She was there for a year and a half before she had the baby. And she had that baby, and the baby was born 7 months after she started showing. And that baby, guess how old that baby is in that picture? That baby is 4 weeks old. Look how big that baby is. And look what's around that baby's head. That baby has a halo. That baby was Jesus Christ. Jesus isn't coming at the end of times. Jesus is always here. And the only truth that exists is love. And that love is redeemed through love's unconditional forgiveness and Jesus' unconditional love for us all. And at any time, there's always Jesus on our planet. It's the only reason why we still are here. Because that unconditional love is there. And you ask, so, like that woman, today at the farmer's market who got really upset with me. I don't want to argue with you. And I said, listen, I'm not arguing with you. I'm just telling you things. I was telling her how that within 10 months, that we were already living under martial law, and that, Donald Trump was just there to make us comfortable with it, and that money was going to go away because the only thing back, pumping up the dollar is that it is the planet's money. And the only reason we went to war in Iraq and Iran and Afghanistan and all of the Mideastern countries in Africa is that every country that had oil, that wanted to not take treasury notes for that oil but wanted gold, we attacked. Why did Gaddafi, we put him in power and we let him kill people and run rampant and do terrorism because he was doing it for us. ISIS, they were the army of Saddam Hussein. And we went in there, we fired them all. So they had to eat and feed their families. So our CIA made them ISIS. The picture in the Wall Street Journal of them, going into Fallujah, they were in M1 Abrams tanks. They were wearing U.S. uniforms. They had Humvees. They didn't have AK-47s. They had M16s. Anyway, so I was telling this woman this, and she didn't want to hear it. She wanted to stick her head in the sand. I love America. America is great. America's it. Sorry. We wiped out hundreds of millions of indigenous people. We took, in South America and Mexico, the Inca Aztecs, they had, cities bigger than Rome and London and Paris at the time. It's just that we had gunpowder and guns, and we had math showing, we're going to black out the sun. Well, the priests of the Incas knew all about the math of the rotation of the planets, but the average people didn't. And they were at that point mistrusting their priest scientists, just like we are mistrusting our priest scientists. What's going on in our environment, it's not weather change, it's weather destruction. It's not global warming, because the real fact is what's going to happen. There's a movie by a book written by good old Art Bell called The Day After, where all this heating and the poles are melting, and then all of a sudden it snaps like a rubber band, and we have the Ice Age in Long Island and New York and D.C. and Chicago is like, and pretty much everyone in America dies. And the bottom line is they want to build that fence down along the border, not to keep the Mexicans out, but to keep us in so we die. So up around me, there's a big, transnational corporation that has rented all the property and grows feed for cows. And they hide the cows up in the hills in these gigantic abattoirs, and they grow the corn. And what's truly amazing is they spray they spray, and they built this corporation built a beautiful middle school right in the middle of the farmlands. And from March till May, they spray like crazy right over the school. The airplanes don't stop. They just swoop right over, because the cornfields go right up to the edge of the school. And so these kids are like the level of child cancer, the application of the IQ of these kids. It is unbelievable, and it's horrific, because the people who live only 20-30 miles away in the white college towns of Boone, North Carolina, where App State is, where you shouldn't send your kid. Whatever state you live in, send them to that state college then get that kid to go to Trinity in Dublin or in Oxford, because you can go to foreign lands cheaper than you can go to school in America. Um, and we have to wake up. We can change. I've been involved in many, people were going, like when the wars were going on in Central America, and no one seemed to care, but we made a lot of stink about it. We made a big change. But once the big change happened, once Iran-Contra was brought to light, um, we didn't stay involved, because that's when the CIA went in there and basically, after hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people were traumatized by the wars there, they turned them into drug gangs like MS-13. It's a CIA run event to bring drugs and violence into our country, to destabilize our country, because, it isn't Russia that's hacking everyone's democracy. If you've ever watched any of Captain America movies, that's exactly what's happening. Hail Hydra is what's going on. The end of World War II, Germany was the German people were bombed into the Stone Age, and the Nazis won the war. Go look up Operation Paperclip, you know. Go look up David Icke. Go look up Joseph P. Farrell. Go look up, um, you know, Howard Zinn's American History. There are a lot of people who have published and written about all of this. It's there. You can see it. Go look up a book called None Dare Call Conspiracy by Gary Allen. He was one of my fellow students who studied under Professor Quigley at Georgetown. And Quigley was the historian for the Council on Foreign Relations, and he wrote a number of amazing books about what's going on. And that's where I learned to be a scholar, was from him, and that's why for 20, 30 years I worked for those guys, writing papers on it, but from my point of view, which they appreciated. Seemingly, they don't appreciate it much anymore. They say, hey, good to see you, Al, but, and I know you guys listen. And I know you appreciate my point of view, or otherwise I wouldn't be here. And if I commit suicide, or I die in a car accident, or some interesting thing, folks who are my family here on YouTube know I didn't do it. And I'm not scared of being offed. You've seen, the book I showed you today is one of 100. 100. And this photograph here, this is just one tribe of many tribes I've lived with. And now these folks, they're wearing, prints made in India, Now, I've lived with indigenous people in Brazil, where I was the first white person they ever saw. Meaning I went into indigenous tribal folk in the rainforest when they were still there. They're not there anymore. From 1988 today, they have wiped out the Brazilian rainforests to grow palm oil. And I will tell you the story of the boys from Brazil. So the city of Buzios, where I was hoodwinked to go and build a nightclub for the madame who owned everything, was only there because the Nazis had built a hospital there. That was, with Dr. Mengele's boys. And they had their rancheros up in the hills above the rainforest. And they were the guys who were making the money. The Nazis were making the money off of the destruction of the rainforests. And they had their island of Dr. Moreau. They had genetically engineered human beings. And that was 1988. And one of the people who let me into that whole scene was the head guy. They call him Doctore, And, he was close to 100 years old. He looked 35, And he was talking about transhumanism in 1988. and that they had perfected it in the 1930s and 40s. And he said that we had, this gigantic laboratory of millions of people to experiment on. And the Jews were the perfect things because they were genetically kind of pure. They weren't like mutts like the rest of Europe. And so I was exposed to all of that. And he sent me out into the rainforest, you know, as this guy, you know, do you ever read, there's a book called Hitman I was a hitman for the corporate structure. And it was a guy just like me who was basically a social scientist who went out to more, Arab countries, that were already somewhat, taken over by the Europeans, but he manipulated them to get at their resources. He was involved in overthrowing governments. He was involved, but he was the business diplomat guy, not the CIA guy. But he would write the reports on who you should go whack and who you should turn and who you should do that. And that's what, you know, I was used for, but I never did. I kind of looked at it from a different point of view, which again was all data that they just stuck into their little algorithm. They already had artificial intelligence during World War II. That IBM worked for, sold the punch cards to the Nazis all through the war, just like Herbert Walker Bush's daddy, Prescott Bush, was selling oil and ball bearings to the Nazis the last day. And Herbert Walker Bush wasn't the son of Prescott Bush. He was son of a Russian spy who was Nikola Tesla's assistant. And the book about the man in the yellow hat, that was Herbert Walker Bush's commie spy daddy. And George, the little, monkey, was, you know, George Herbert Walker Bush. And that's where, George W. came from. And George W.'s mother, biological father, was Aleister Crowley, the guy who invented the Church of Satan. I mean, just scratch the surface, gang, and it's going to blow your mind. But as I was talking to this one guy who made the most amazing Boston cream pie, so he's, an environmentalist. And he's been here and he's been fighting the good fight his whole friggin' life. Even though he went to Paris and learned to be a French baker, and he's as Parisian as you get, but he came from these mountains, so he's, mountain boy. So anyway, but he speaks French. So, I said, "Parlez-vous say seafood plate," and he laughed because he got the joke. And so, but he doesn't give up. The corporate, you know, monsters of this valley. He fights on an individual level and gets people involved, and he never gives up. And what his skills are, he stays at it. And that's what these people did. They did not forget their tribal ways. They did corroborees and ceremonies. This guy here with the cowboy hat, he took me on walkabouts and we went to all the sacred sites because that's what I was there for, because the Australian government sent me down there to do an ethnography on these people, and they would publish it in their own way to show that, see, the Australian government aren't monsters. They're taking care of the tribe. Yeah, of course, we killed 1,100 of them in 1972 for their uranium, titanium, and uridium and gold, but hey, we're watching out for these 9. And what they wanted me to do is find their sacred sites so they could put little fences around them and tell the world that, see, we have respect for their religion, instead of, their real sacred site was the whole Northern Territory. Well, they were going to dig the crap out of that. They already are for coal. China is taking all that coal and burning it, or has burnt it. So, and China basically owns Australia. Basically owns the whole Asian region. And Donnie bailed from NAFTA and TAP, and the Pacific Rim Treaty, and this new treaty he just put in is basically put the worst parts of NAFTA and TAP together. So the corporate guys will be even happier. So we got we have to look at what we can do, what we love, and we have to serve what we love. You know, between 1970 and today, we have a third of Earth's species have gone extinct. We have killed them. And every day, close to 200 species we kill. We take out the blue herring so we can have plastic beer holders. We destroy the frogs. Like I said, in my beautiful little part of paradise, the frogs are gone. The the birds are gone. The only bird that is there's a number of bluebirds and robins, but they fly in and out. The only bird that really hangs with me is my owl. Big owl, 4 foot tall, 12-foot wingspan. You know, he only comes and visits me late at night, and I'll have to have a fire in my ceremonial fire. And he comes, and there's a tree that I've kind of trimmed so he can comfortably light on a big branch and hang out with me. It's the only bird that's left. Now, I'm not quite sure what gender because I haven't gotten close enough. Because man, his talons are bigger than my hand. I don't want to get too close to this guy. I mean, where he hangs out with me with fire, he's like 20, 30 feet away from me, and he's very happy to be there. But I don't know how happy he would be if I climbed up the tree and started pushing his feathers away to see what kind of gender he was. My sense is that it's a mama, because all the animals that are still visiting me are mama animals. The bear is a mama animal. The fox, the wolf, the rabbits are all mama things, and their families aren't nearby. They just come and visit, And the part that was my garden, which is kind of deeper on the edge because it gets the perfect sunlight, not too hot, not too cold, gets the perfect everything. Even if it doesn't rain, the mist comes in and forms on the plants and then forms on the trees above and then rains in the early morning on them. So even if we're in a drought, they still get water to grow. Anyway, so I can't work the garden anymore. And the people who used to be my neighbors don't do it because if they can't be playing a video game, they can't be bothered. It's been 53 minutes. I'm going to try and do a bunch of 1 hour YouTubes, and I'm going to try and do them on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays at 11 a.m. Because I hear that the more time you put in, the more time the algorithm will shunt. I mean, I really love my family. Again, don't go to your son will be throwing his money away if he goes to App State. Oh, he'll love it, but he will graduate you, or he will be in debt for hundreds of thousands of dollars, unless you live in North Carolina. If that's the state you live in, then then it's a fair thing. But his education, I'll give you a good majority of the. Oh, the library's going to be closing in 10 minutes, so I'm going to turn off now so I can upload. Okay. So Tuesday at 11 a.m. Come visit. Okay.